I stood outside my father's study with papers proving Grandpa had left me a $28 million trust hidden inside my coat. I was about to walk in and tell the family everything. Then I heard my father say, if she refuses to sign, use what she went through after deployment to prove she is not capable. Should I open the door and confront them, or stay silent? I was standing outside my father's study with proof of a $28.4 million trust folded inside my coat when I heard my family discussing how to take it from me. The grandfather clock marked each second with a dull tick. Ice touched the side of a glass. The leather chair gave a soft groan as my father shifted his weight. The door was almost closed. Almost. They thought I was somewhere else in the house. They had no idea I was only a few feet away, one hand raised, ready to knock. My father's voice came through first. If she controls that trust, we lose access to every property tied to it. My brother answered with his usual confidence. She'll sign. She doesn't even use an accountant. I did not move. My mother spoke next. Her voice was quieter, gentler. That made it worse. She said that if I refused, grief and deployment stress gave them other options. Victor Lang, my father's financial advisor, explained the rest in calm language. He mentioned a temporary family management agreement. He said they could present it as support while I recovered from coming home and losing Grandpa. If that failed, they could question whether I was ready to make major financial decisions. He never used a diagnosis. He did not need to. The meaning was clear. They planned to take my exhaustion, my silence, and the months I had spent serving overseas, then turn all of it into evidence that I could not be trusted with my own judgment. My father let out a slow breath. She still thinks silence makes her strong. There are families that never ask why one person stays quiet. They choose the answer that gives them the most power. My father had always treated my restraint as surrender. My brother saw it as proof that he was smarter. My mother saw it as space she could fill with whatever explanation kept the peace. None of them understood that silence can also mean someone is listening. My hand was still lifted toward the door. I lowered it slowly. I did not walk in. I did not shout. I did not give them a chance to change their words and tell me I had misunderstood. They believed I was standing outside that room with nothing but grief. They had no idea I was also carrying the one thing they could not afford for me to understand. The truth. I stepped backward, careful not to let the floorboard beneath me complain. Then I turned toward the side door. I did not know exactly how I would stop them yet. I only knew that when I finally moved, none of them would be able to pretend this had been a misunderstanding. 3 days earlier, I still believed the hardest thing waiting for me in Virginia was burying my grandfather. The message reached me near the end of a 10-month deployment. It was brief and official. Grandpa was gone. I read it twice before the words settled into meaning. I was used to making decisions under pressure. I could read a room, weigh risk, and keep my voice steady when others needed certainty. But no training had prepared me to come home after the only person who understood me was already gone. The emergency flight blurred into airport lights, bad coffee, and shallow sleep. By the time I landed in Virginia, I felt exhausted and numb. I wore my dress uniform to the funeral because it was the only formal clothing I owned that still fit after so many months away. My father stood near the casket and delivered a polished eulogy. He spoke about family legacy, generations of sacrifice, and protecting what we had built. The words sounded beautiful. They also sounded rehearsed. While he spoke, I remembered Grandpa's letters. He never wrote long speeches about pride. He asked simple questions. Was I sleeping enough? Were the people under my command doing all right? Did I still remember the cardinals near his porch in the morning? Those questions told me more than praise ever could. He cared about the parts of my life no one else noticed. After the service, as people moved toward their cars under a gray Virginia sky, Andrew Pierce approached me. He had handled Grandpa's legal affairs for years. He wore a dark coat and carried a thick sealed envelope. He placed it in my hands but did not let go right away. "Don't open this in the house," he said. "Wait until you're alone and lock the doors." I looked at him. There was something in his face beyond professional caution. It was not fear exactly. It was warning. I sat in my rental car with the envelope across my knees, rain sliding down the windshield, and Grandpa's last question echoing in my head. Was I still listening for the Cardinals? I broke the seal, and in less than a minute, everything I thought I knew about my family changed. I tore the envelope open with my thumb. The first page was a formal notice from Andrew's office. My name appeared near the top, followed by words I had to read 3 times before they made sense. Primary beneficiary and acting trustee. Beneath that was a preliminary valuation. $28.4 million. I stared at the number until the rain on the windshield blurred into silver lines. Nothing in my life had prepared me for seeing that kind of money connected to my name. Mine to manage, but it was not a check. It was not money sitting in one account, waiting to be spent. The trust included 2 commercial properties, a long-term investment portfolio, municipal bonds, index funds, and a reserve account for maintenance. It also included Grandpa's house and the land around it. Every page made the same point. This was not a gift I could simply deposit. It was a responsibility. I turned to the section explaining where the assets had come from. The trust had been built from Grandpa's personal investments. It was separate from Caldwell Building Supply. My father and brother had already received most of the operating shares in the company years earlier. My mother had the right to use a vacation house for the rest of her life, along with a private annuity. Grandpa had not left them empty-handed. That mattered. Whatever happened next would not be about survival. It would be about wanting control over something that had never belonged to them. A handwritten letter rested behind the legal documents. I knew his writing before I unfolded it. The letters leaned slightly to the right, careful and steady, even when his hands had begun to shake. He wrote that he was not giving me the trust because I needed it. He was giving it to me because I had never believed his money made him valuable. I sat very still. He reminded me that I had never asked him to invest in my career. I had never asked for a position in the company. I had never called to ask what he planned to leave behind. Instead, I asked how he was sleeping, whether the house felt too quiet, whether the Cardinals still came to the porch in the morning. He did not call my parents or my brother bad people. That would have been easier to read. He wrote that people could love one another and still do cruel things when money made them afraid of losing control. That sentence stayed with me. I wanted to feel grateful. Instead, guilt came first. I had been overseas during the final months of his life. My mother may have driven him to appointments. My brother may have handled repairs, insurance forms, and the small emergencies that never make it into family stories. Had Grandpa chosen me because I was too far away to disappoint him? Was I being rewarded for being absent? Did the people who stayed have the right to feel betrayed? In many families, inheritance is not measured only in dollars. It is measured in hospital drives, missed calls, unpaid hours, and the private belief that one person sacrificed more than everyone else. I understood that. I also understood that guilt could make a person surrender something before they had even decided what it meant. I returned to the trust documents. I was not only the beneficiary. As acting trustee, I could hire independent advisors. I could keep or sell assets if doing so served the purpose of the trust. I could refuse to use trust property as collateral for debts connected to the family business. I could also delay distributions if anyone tried to pressure me. One sentence required every transfer of authority to be reviewed by legal counsel chosen independently by me. I read that line twice. It was too specific to be accidental. Still, I did not want to begin this new reality by hiding from my family. Secrecy felt like the fastest way to turn grief into suspicion. I decided to go to my parents' house that evening. I planned to tell them I had no intention of changing the way I lived. I was not going to sell everything. I was willing to discuss the responsibilities involved. I wanted them to hear the truth from me, not through a lawyer or formal notice. Some part of me still believed honesty could keep us from becoming the kind of family that fought over a dead man's decisions. When I pulled into the driveway, the light in my father's study was still on. I entered through the side door, the way I had since childhood. No one called out. The house was quiet, except for voices at the end of the hall. The study door was almost closed. Almost. I raised my hand to knock and heard my father say my name. My father said my name as if it belonged in a business plan. If Aaron controls the trust, the company loses access to every property tied to it. I stayed where I was. Through the narrow gap beside the door, I saw only a strip of lamplight across the floor. Victor explained that the trust was separate from the company, but the properties still mattered. For years, their value had helped the business look stronger to banks. Without access to them, refinancing could become difficult. That was the first sign the company was in trouble. My brother gave a short laugh. She'll sign. She doesn't even use an accountant. Victor asked whether he was sure I would not read the agreement closely. My brother answered without hesitation. She manages shipping schedules and soldiers. She doesn't manage real money. I remembered a supply contract I had reviewed overseas only months earlier. One missing clause had exposed millions of dollars in risk. No one in that room knew about it. They had never asked what my work required. People often dismiss skills they have never seen inside a room they control. My mother spoke next. She said she did not want anyone to hurt me. They could remind me that I had just come home. They could say I needed rest. They could offer to manage things only until I felt settled. Her voice sounded caring. That made it cruel. Then she said, and if she refuses, grief and deployment stress give us other options. My nails pressed into my palm. I thought about every time she had asked whether I was sleeping after a deployment, every time she had lowered her voice and asked about bad dreams. I had believed those questions came from concern. Now I wondered how much of my private life she had stored away as something useful. Victor described the document he could prepare. He called it an interim family asset management agreement. He said interim would sound safer than permanent. Continuity would sound better than control. The agreement would not need a clear end date. Voting power could go to a family committee made up of my father, my brother, and Victor. Victor would also receive a management fee. If I refused, they could request an independent review of my ability to manage complex assets. He did not promise they would win. He said, "You don't need to win immediately. You need to create enough doubt that she can't act alone." The grandfather clock kept ticking. My father said he had spent his life keeping the company inside the family. He would not let me hand the legacy to outsiders. I was his daughter, but because I had chosen a life outside his business, he spoke of me as if I were not family. To him, belonging had always required obedience. Then he said the sentence I would remember. She still thinks silence makes her strong. My brother laughed under his breath. A cold feeling moved down my spine. My heartbeat did not race, it slowed. The part of me that had come to explain, reassure, and keep the peace began to disappear. I could open the door. I could show them the papers in my coat and tell them I had heard everything. But if I did, they would change the story. They would say I had misunderstood. They would call me exhausted, emotional, suspicious. They would use my reaction as proof of what they were already planning to claim. So I lowered my hand. Silence is not always the absence of an answer. Sometimes it is the decision not to give someone time to rewrite a lie before you remember the truth. I stepped away from the door. The floorboard near the stairs creaked, so I stayed close to the wall. I left through the side entrance and closed it without a sound. No one followed me. Inside the rental car, I opened the notes application on my phone. Before starting the engine, I wrote down the time. I listed every person in the room and the exact phrases I could remember. Interim family asset management agreement, continuity instead of control, deployment stress, independent review, the trust properties and the company's need to refinance. I did not have a recording. I had only my memory, and memory changes when anger gets involved. Writing it down was the first thing I could do to protect the facts. From that moment on, they were no longer people I needed to convince. They were people I needed to stop. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always find it remarkable that a story told in one quiet room can reach people in so many different places and time zones. By sunrise, I had written down every word I could remember. Then I drove 2 towns away and called the one man Grandpa had told me to trust. By sunrise, I had written down every word I could remember. Then I drove 2 towns away and called the one man Grandpa had told me to trust. I chose a small diner outside Ashland because no one from my father's business circle went there. The waitress did not know me. The coffee machine hissed behind the counter, and dishes clicked in the kitchen. There was enough noise to cover a private call. I took the last booth and sat facing the door. Andrew answered on the second ring. I told him who had been in the study. I gave him the name of Victor's proposed agreement. I repeated what they had said about grief, deployment stress, and my ability to make financial decisions. Then I explained that they wanted access to the trust properties because the company might need them. Andrew listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet. He did not sound surprised. That frightened me more than shock would have. Your grandfather left instructions for what I'm allowed to show you, and when. Andrew explained that Grandpa had prepared several sealed files. He had not wanted me to distrust the family based only on his fears. The files could be opened only if someone took specific action. One condition involved asking me to transfer authority. Another involved questioning my judgment. A third covered legal action against the trust. The last involved using trust property to support company debt. Grandpa had not assumed his children would betray him. He had prepared for the possibility that they might choose to. I asked Andrew to open everything. He refused. He said the conditions had not all been met, and he intended to follow Grandpa's instructions exactly. I was frustrated. My family had discussed taking control of my inheritance, and Andrew was still holding information back. Then he said something I needed to hear. Being careful is not the same as being dishonest. You are not required to warn someone before they try to take advantage of you. He told me not to sign anything. I should not reveal that I had overheard them or try to trap anyone into a recording. After every meeting, I should write down what happened. Important communication should move to email. I should not use a family computer or shared account. There was no promise that everything would work out. There was only a plan for keeping the facts clear. That evening, my mother invited me to dinner so we could be together after the funeral. I went because refusing too soon might tell them I knew. She held me longer than usual. On the table was the old blue mug I had used in high school. She had made chicken and dumplings, the meal she cooked whenever one of us was homesick. For a moment, I wanted to believe the evening was real. Maybe part of it was, that was what hurt. Some of those gestures had once been honest. Now they were being used to lower my guard. During dinner, my mother said they had been with Grandpa through his final year. Then she added, very softly, "You weren't." The words found the weakest place in me. I remembered calls I had postponed. I remembered the last letter I had not answered. She had probably driven him to appointments and waited beside him while I was far away. The most dangerous kind of manipulation contains part of the truth. I had been absent. But my absence did not turn Grandpa's right to make his own decisions into property they could claim. My brother asked whether I planned to return to the army or finally settle down. I told him I still had obligations and a civilian job waiting. Then he asked whether I had spoken with Andrew about the will. He gave me some documents, I said. I'm still reviewing them. My brother glanced at my father. I noticed my father said, Grandpa had always believed assets should serve the family as a whole. Then he asked whether one person should control that much property alone. Did Grandpa ever tell you he was worried about that? I asked. My father did not answer. Instead, he said older people sometimes change their minds near the end of life. They became uncertain. They made decisions they might not have made years earlier. There it was. They were not only preparing to question me, they were preparing to question him. I left without giving them a reason to suspect anything. In the car, I emailed Andrew a summary of the dinner. They were building a story piece by piece. I had been absent. I was grieving. I did not understand the business. I had separated myself from the family. Any refusal could be described as selfish or unstable. 2 days later, Mom texted that Victor had prepared a few routine papers and asked me to stop by. The word routine was the first warning. The leather folder waiting on the coffee table was the second. The leather folder sat in the middle of the coffee table, placed so neatly that it looked less like a document and more like a warning. Victor sat beside my father. My mother brought me coffee in the blue mug she had used at dinner. My brother took the chair near the window, pretending not to care, though his eyes kept returning to my face. My chair faced all three of them. The room had been arranged like an intervention. Familiar furniture, familiar voices, a familiar drink meant to lower my guard. Nothing about it felt routine. Victor opened the folder and turned the first page toward me. The title read, Interim Family Asset Management Agreement. He said it was not a transfer of ownership. It would simply give the family continuity while I got my bearings. My father added that no one was trying to take anything from me. My mother said I should not have to carry so much responsibility while I was grieving. Victor made it sound legal. My father made it sound necessary. My mother made it sound loving. My brother made it sound as if I was too inexperienced to understand it. I picked up the document and began reading. The agreement transferred voting authority to a family oversight committee. The committee would include my father, my brother, and Victor. Victor would receive a management fee based on the value of the assets. My father and brother would gain the power to approve the sale or mortgage of the trust properties. I would remain the beneficiary and receive distributions. I just would not control the decisions. The arrangement would continue until the committee determined that I was ready to resume responsibility. There was no date, there was no standard, there was no independent person deciding when I was ready. The word interim appeared in the title. Nowhere else did the document explain when interim ended. One thing I had learned from reviewing contracts was that comforting words usually appeared at the top. The real power lived in the paragraphs people were too tired, rushed, or trusting to read. I looked at Victor. Why does this give people who are not beneficiaries the authority to sell trust property? Before he answered, my brother laughed. You manage supplies and personnel. This is different. I kept my eyes on Victor. Not as different as you think. I did not need to list my qualifications. I only needed to ask the right questions. Who approved a sale? Who collected a fee? Who carried the legal risk? Who decided when my authority came back? Then I asked Victor who he represented. Me, the trust, or my father. He paused, then said he was facilitating a family solution. That was not an answer. I closed the folder and said Andrew would review the agreement before I made any decision. The room changed. My father leaned forward. There's nothing hostile here unless you decide to make it hostile. My mother placed her hand on my arm. She said they were protecting me from making a major decision while I was overwhelmed. My brother added that waiting could cost the company an important financial opportunity. That was the first time anyone admitted the business was under time pressure. What deadline is the company facing? I asked. My father answered first. There was no deadline, he said. This was simply responsible planning. Victor looked down at the folder. That small movement told me more than the answer. They were hiding a date. Whatever it was, they needed my signature before I understood it. My father repeated that I should not turn the meeting into something hostile. I looked at the papers he had helped prepare. I didn't bring the paperwork. No one spoke. The air conditioner continued to hum. I wrote the date on my copy and photographed the first page. Andrew will review it. Until then, I'm not signing anything. Victor reached for the folder and said he would keep the materials. I told him I needed a complete copy of anything I had been asked to sign. If he refused, I would note that in an email. His hand stopped. After a moment, he passed me a copy. I stood. My mother looked up at me. Is this really how you want the family to remember you? For a second, I saw the woman who had cared for me when I was sick. Then, I saw the woman who had helped place a trap in front of me and called it protection. I'm beginning to understand that I don't control how this family chooses to remember anyone. I put the agreement in my bag and walked out. Inside the car, I called Andrew. When I read the title, he went silent. Then he said, "Come to my office. Your grandfather's second instruction has now been triggered." I thought the agreement was the worst thing Grandpa had expected them to do. I was wrong. The sealed file in Andrew's office showed me they had tried the same thing once before, with an old man who knew he was running out of time. The sealed file waited on Andrew's desk after the office had gone dark. His office sat on the second floor of an old brick building in downtown Richmond. The floorboards creaked, the blinds were closed. A laptop rested beside an envelope with Grandpa's signature across the seal. Andrew turned it toward me. "Open only if an attempt is made to transfer Aaron's authority without independent counsel." Victor's agreement had met that condition. Andrew said Grandpa had not made the video for revenge. He wanted to prove that he understood his decisions, explain the trust, and prevent anyone from rewriting his wishes after he was gone. Grandpa had left the truth away to keep speaking. Andrew pressed play. Grandpa appeared in his study. The heater hummed. Birds called outside the window. He coughed once, then glanced toward the chair where I used to do homework. He gave the date and said he was recording by choice. His voice was tired, his eyes were clear. He explained that my father began with reasonable-sounding concerns. The properties were becoming complicated, the company needed flexibility, family control would be more efficient, an outside trust company would not understand the legacy. When Grandpa refused, my father mentioned a missed doctor's appointment. One missed appointment became a question about memory. That question became a suggestion that Grandpa should not handle difficult decisions alone. Concern became pressure so gradually that I almost felt guilty for noticing. People who control others rarely begin with threats. They begin with help. They offer to carry a burden, then act offended when you ask where they are taking it. Grandpa said my brother later proposed selling 2 trust properties. He called it a way to free up capital, support expansion, protect jobs, and avoid outside borrowing. Grandpa requested complete financial reports. My brother never provided them. Grandpa refused because he believed long-term assets were being used to hide a short-term risk. My brother replied that younger people would eventually have to correct the decisions of older men. Then Grandpa repeated the sentence that changed everything. "Maybe it's time we had someone evaluate whether you should still be handling all of this alone." He sounded hurt, not angry. He said that was when he understood his age could become evidence against him, not because he was confused, but because he would not cooperate. Helen Brooks, the nurse who cared for him at home, saw him after one of those meetings. She documented that he was alert and fully aware of his affairs. She also noted his anxiety after my father left. Then Grandpa spoke about my mother. She had cooked for him, driven him to appointments, and cared for him with real patience. But when my father pressured him, she said, "Richard is only trying to protect the family." Grandpa looked into the camera. "Sometimes the person who keeps the peace is only keeping the powerful person comfortable." My mother had not started the pressure. She had made it easier to continue. Grandpa took a slow breath. "They may love me, but they love control more." I had wanted love and betrayal to exist on opposite sides. His words forced me to accept something harder. A person can love you and still betray you when that love is weaker than fear, greed, or the need for control. Grandpa shifted in his chair. People reveal who they are when they believe the door is closed. After one meeting, my father and brother kept talking in the hallway because they thought he had fallen asleep. The phrases he heard were the same ones I had heard. "For your own good," "temporary control," "too much stress." "We are protecting the family." They had not invented a new plan for me. They were repeating the one they had already used on him. Grandpa said he chose me because I knew when to seek expert help. I had never treated his wealth as proof of his worth. I had built a life that did not depend on inheritance. I could survive disagreement without buying anyone's approval. Then he said, "You do not have to prove that you deserve what I left you. You only have to decide what kind of person you will be while protecting it." I did not cry. Not then. I felt anger first. He had spent his final months protecting himself from his own family. He had kept it from me because he did not want to burden me while I was deployed. They had turned care into leverage and concern into a weapon. The trust was no longer only about $28.4 million. It was about his right to decide while he was capable. It was about employees and property being pulled into a rescue plan no one had explained. It was about refusing to let my service or mental health erase my judgment. The video ended. Andrew placed a thinner file in front of me. The company's name appeared on the cover. Beneath it was a loan deadline only a few weeks away. "There's one more reason they need your signature," he said, "and it has nothing to do with keeping the family together." I had thought greed was the reason they wanted the trust. The loan file showed me something more dangerous. Panic, and desperate people rarely stop after their first failed plan. Andrew slid the thinner file across the desk. The number on the first page was not 28 million. It was smaller, but it came with a deadline. Caldwell Building Supply had less than 3 weeks before a large commercial loan came due. Jason had pushed the company into a new market before the contracts were secure. They bought a warehouse and installed a distribution line ahead of demand. Then costs rose. One major customer backed out. The revenue Jason had promised the bank never arrived. The company had also violated a loan condition. The bank could refuse to renew the loan or demand more collateral. Andrew showed me a presentation sent to the bank. 2 properties from Grandpa's trust were described as family-controlled real estate potentially available for collateral support. They did not own those properties, but they had let the bank believe access was only a matter of paperwork. Victor's agreement was meant to make that promise true. I had thought greed made people want more. Panic was more dangerous. A frightened person could justify almost anything if it delayed the consequences. The file included payroll records. I saw drivers, warehouse workers, and office staff. Their families depended on a company whose leaders had hidden how close the bank was. Andrew asked whether I wanted to help the company. "I want to help the people. That isn't necessarily the same thing." We prepared an offer. An independent firm would review the books. Management would disclose every loan. Jason would step away from financial control. A restructuring advisor would work with the bank. The trust properties would not be used as collateral. Any short-term money would come from an outside investor. I was not asking my father to surrender the company. I was asking him to surrender the right to hide. The next morning, I met Jason at the old distribution warehouse. A forklift beeped in reverse. Metal struck concrete behind the loading doors. Workers called my name because they remembered Grandpa. Jason kept us near the glass office wall. An older supervisor stood close enough to hear. He said that if the bank walked away, people would lose their jobs. He hoped I understood what my delay was doing. He had created the risk. Now he was placing the guilt in my hands. "You can save this company with one signature." You needed that signature before I knew the company was in trouble. You weren't asking me to save it. You were asking me to hide what you did. He called Grandpa old-fashioned and the property's dead capital. Through the glass, I watched a driver close the back of a truck. Assets are not dead. They only become inconvenient to people who cannot control them. I asked why he refused an independent review. "Because we don't have 6 months for strangers to pick apart every decision." That answer told me the failed expansion was not the whole problem. Jason said everyone would know I could have saved them. "No, they'll know you gambled with their livelihoods and tried to put the debt in my name after you lost." He called me selfish. He said the army had made me cold. I placed the offer on his desk. It expired at noon the next day. That evening, my father called about a leaking pipe at Grandpa's house. There was no leak. My parents were waiting in the living room. On the table sat a lawyer's card and a draft request for an evaluation of my financial judgment. My father said I had been home less than a week. I was barely sleeping, making accusations, and refusing advice from people who understood the business. My mother spoke softly. "No one believed something was wrong with me," she said. "They only believed I had been through a great deal. They were denying the threat while placing it in front of me." My father said a judge would hear that I returned from deployment, inherited a fortune, and immediately became suspicious of everyone. "Is that the story you plan to tell?" "It's the story your behavior supports. You used Grandpa's age against him. Now you're trying to use my service against me." My mother said she was worried. "Were you worried before or after you learned what the trust was worth?" She looked away. My father said he would gather the family and explain that I was putting dozens of jobs at risk. He still believed a crowd could do what the paperwork had failed to do. "Put every concern in writing. Send it to Andrew." He hesitated. He wanted the threat to work. He did not want it preserved. Before leaving, I looked at the study door where Grandpa had recorded his video. The coming family meeting would not be a conversation. My father planned to control the judge, the jury, and the story. From the car, I called Andrew. "They're gathering the family. Are you ready for them to hear his voice? They've been speaking for him long enough. If you are still listening, please leave a comment below and tell me how satisfied you are with the story so far. It lets me know that there are still people walking beside me through this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement I could have as I continue toward the final part." 2 days later, I walked into my parents' living room and found nearly every relative I had left waiting for me. 2 days later, I walked into my parents' living room and found nearly every relative I had left waiting for me. My father stood near the fireplace. My mother sat on the couch with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jason leaned against the wall beside the window. Victor had a leather folder resting across his knees. Aunts, uncles, and 2 members of the company board filled the other chairs. Some of them avoided my eyes. Others looked at me with the quiet disappointment of people who believed they already knew the whole story. They had not come to hear both sides. They had come to confirm the version my father had given them. In families that care deeply about appearances, truth is often decided by whoever makes the first phone call. My father waited until I sat down. Then he began. He said I had received a private trust worth more than $28 million and refused to share any meaningful information with the family. He said I was blocking the company from using property that Grandpa had spent a lifetime building. He spoke about drivers, warehouse workers, and families who depended on the business. Then he said I was using legal documents against the people who had cared for Grandpa during his final year. "She was overseas," he said. "We were here." Several relatives nodded. The old guilt rose inside me. I remembered the calls I had missed, the letter I had not answered, the months when other people had been close enough to see Grandpa grow weaker. But guilt did not change what they had done. I let my father finish. Jason took over next. He admitted that the expansion had faced difficulties, but he described them as normal business risks. He said one signature could protect everything Grandpa had built. He did not mention the false revenue projections. He did not mention the deadline on the loan. He did not mention that the bank had been led to believe the trust properties could be used as collateral. He did not mention Victor's fee. When people say they are protecting everything, sometimes the only thing they truly mean is their own authority. I waited until no one had anything left to add. Then I placed Victor's agreement on the coffee table. Did everyone here know this agreement would pay Victor a management fee and give Dad the right to mortgage Grandpa's properties? The room changed. Victor said that was a technical interpretation of a temporary arrangement. I asked him to show everyone the date when the agreement ended. He turned several pages. There was no date. I asked who would decide when I was ready to receive my authority back. Victor said the Family Oversight Committee would make that determination. And who sits on that committee? He hesitated. My father, Jason, Victor. One of my aunts looked at him. So the 3 people receiving control would also decide when she gets it back? Victor said it was more complicated than that. It was not. I placed the loan presentation beside the agreement. I showed them the page describing Grandpa's properties as family-controlled real estate that might be available as collateral. One of my uncles asked whether the bank knew the trust was separate from the company. My father called it a preliminary discussion. Then I put my own proposal on the table. An independent audit. Full disclosure of the company's debt. Temporary removal of Jason from financial control, outside restructuring help, no trust property used as collateral. I told them my father and brother had refused. The story that I had chosen to let the company fail began to fall apart. My father saw it happening. So he stopped talking about money. He started talking about me. He said I had barely slept since returning home. He said my suspicion was becoming extreme. He reminded everyone that I had just come back from a difficult deployment and was grieving. "Is that your professional opinion?" I asked, "or Victor's financial advice?" No one answered. My mother leaned forward. "Your father is only concerned." I looked at her. "That is exactly what Grandpa said you would call it." I opened my laptop and placed it on the table. My father's face tightened. Grandpa left this for the moment someone tried to call control concern. I pressed play. Grandpa appeared in his study. His voice filled the same room where my father had been speaking for him. "If you are hearing this, then someone has once again called control concern and greed family loyalty." No one moved. Grandpa described my father's threat to question his mental ability. He explained how Jason wanted to sell the 2 properties without providing full financial records. He said my mother had witnessed the pressure and defended it as protection. He stated clearly that he understood the trust, its value, and the reasons for keeping it separate from the company. He said the trust had been designed so it could not be used to cover mistakes he had not been allowed to examine. My mother raised one hand to her mouth. Jason stared at the floor. When the video ended, I read Helen's written statement. Grandpa had known the date, the place, his medications, and his schedule. He had managed his own documents. After my father's visits, he had been anxious, but never confused. Helen wrote that Grandpa once told her he feared becoming a man no one trusted simply because he would not sign. I also read the physician's confirmation that Grandpa had full legal capacity when the trust was created. Jason finally spoke. "We were trying to save the company." "You weren't trying to save the company. You were trying to save yourselves from admitting what you'd done." One uncle asked why Jason had refused an audit. An aunt said no one had told her Victor would collect a fee. One board member stood and said he would not support any company decision until an independent review took place. The group my father had assembled began separating in front of him. He said the video did not tell the whole story. He accused Andrew of influencing Grandpa. Then he announced that he would challenge the trust in court. I closed the laptop and gathered my papers. "Andrew will be ready." My father looked at me. "You think silence makes you powerful?" "No, evidence does." The room had heard Grandpa's voice. The court would now see everything he had left behind. The room had heard Grandpa's voice. The court would now see everything he had left behind. 3 days after my father filed the challenge, his attorney sent a settlement offer. I would keep most of the investment portfolio. My family would control the 2 commercial properties. The company could use them as collateral for a limited period, and everyone involved would keep the dispute private. On paper, I would still walk away with more money than I had ever imagined. For a few hours, I considered accepting. I was tired of documents, careful phone calls, and waking before dawn with my father's words already in my head. Part of me wanted to sign so the noise would stop. Then I read the offer again. If I accepted, I would be agreeing that Grandpa had been wrong to protect those properties from this exact situation. The dispute was no longer about how much money I kept. It was about whether his final decision meant anything when it became inconvenient to the people he had refused. The mediation took place in a conference room downtown. The walls were plain. The table was too large. A pitcher of water sat between us, untouched. My father's attorney spoke first. He said Grandpa had been elderly and increasingly dependent on others. He suggested Andrew had gained too much influence over him. He reminded the mediator that I had been overseas and knew little about what my family had handled during Grandpa's final year. He said the trust threatened the business Grandpa had spent his life building. He said my family wanted fairness. For several minutes, the story sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. The strongest lies are rarely made from nothing. They are built from true details, arranged to hide the fact that matters most. Andrew waited until the attorney finished. Then he began with records showing that Grandpa had created the trust from personal assets. The company had no ownership interest in them. Next came documents showing that my father and Jason had already received operating shares years earlier. Then came Grandpa's medical records. His doctor had confirmed that he understood his finances, the trust, and the legal effect of his decisions. Andrew played the video. After that came two audio recordings I had not heard before. In the first, my father said, "If you won't cooperate, we may have to ask whether you still understand the consequences." In the second, Jason said a career soldier could easily be described as someone without the experience to manage significant wealth. No one at the table looked at me after that. Andrew placed Victor's agreement beside the loan file. Then he added the presentation sent to the bank and my proposal for an independent audit. The mediator turned to Victor. She asked who he represented. He said he had been trying to help the family. She asked who paid him. My father did. She asked why the agreement had no ending date, why Victor would receive a management fee, and why the committee taking my authority would decide when to return it. Victor said he had only been trying to keep the company operating. The mediator told him that good intentions did not remove a conflict of interest. My mother spoke next. She said everyone had been grieving. She said the wrong words had been used, and the matter had grown from misunderstanding. I did not argue with her. The mediator asked whether she denied hearing my father question Grandpa's ability to manage his affairs. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She could not say no. The mediator reviewed her notes. She said the evidence showed a sustained pattern of pressure. Continuing the challenge could trigger the trust's no contest clause and affect assets my family had already received. Victor could face a professional complaint. More records could also become part of a public court file. Then she looked at me. There was no evidence that I lacked the ability to act as trustee. There was no evidence that I had behaved recklessly. I had offered an audit and outside restructuring instead of allowing the company to fail. My father's attorney asked for a break. They left the room. I stayed beside Andrew, staring at the water pitcher. I had imagined this moment many times. I thought being proven right would feel clean. It did not. When my family returned, my father agreed to withdraw the challenge. There was no apology. The papers were placed in front of him. He signed the first page, then the second, then the third. The same hand that had pointed at me before the family now moved slowly across a document, admitting he could not continue. I once thought victory would have a sound. It did. It was the scratch of a pen across paper in a room no one wanted to remain in. Winning the trust did not answer the question waiting outside that conference room. What would happen to the people whose paychecks depended on the company my brother had nearly broken? Winning the trust did not answer the question waiting outside that conference room. What would happen to the people whose paychecks depended on the company my brother had nearly broken? Andrew reminded me that I had no legal duty to save it. If Caldwell Building Supply failed, the reasons were clear. Jason had expanded too fast. My father had hidden the debt. Both had rejected an independent review. Then they tried to use property that did not belong to the company. I could have stepped back. Part of me wanted to. After weeks of being questioned, cornered, and accused, there was a certain appeal in doing nothing. Consequences had finally reached the people who created them. I could let the bank decide the rest. Then I thought about the warehouse. I remembered the drivers who had known Grandpa by his first name. I remembered the older supervisor who had greeted me beside the loading doors. Those people had not approved Jason's projections. They had not promised the bank assets they did not control. Their families should not become the price of my anger. I won't rescue the people who created the crisis, I told Andrew, but I won't use innocent workers as the price of proving a point. Andrew introduced me to a regional investment group that specialized in troubled family businesses. They were willing to provide enough money to keep the company operating, but only if the business accepted real oversight. Their conditions were direct. The books would be audited. An independent financial officer would be appointed. Jason would lose control of financial decisions. My father would no longer approve major transactions alone. The failed expansion would be sold. Employee wages and health benefits would be protected during the transition. The trust properties would not be used as collateral. I agreed to support the process, but I did not put trust money into the company. The rescue had to stand on honest numbers and outside terms. My father called the proposal a public humiliation. He said he would rather lose the company than hand control to strangers. Then this was never only about saving the company, I said. He accused me of destroying the family legacy. I told him a legacy was not one man keeping the same chair while everyone around him paid for his mistakes. That ended the conversation. Jason reacted differently. He wanted to stay. The investment group offered him an operating role because he knew the customers and distribution system, but he had to disclose every major decision, cooperate with the audit, give up financial authority, and repay bonuses tied to projections that had not been true. He said I was punishing him. Accountability feels like punishment when you've spent your life being protected from consequences. He stared at me for a long time, then he signed. The restructuring took several weeks. There were difficult meetings and more numbers than I wanted to see. The failed warehouse project was sold. The company became smaller, but more stable. Most of the employees kept their jobs. My father left daily management. He remained connected to the company in name, but he no longer controlled every large decision. Jason stayed in operations under supervision. I was offered a seat on the board. I declined. I had spent too long fighting one person's need for control. I did not want to replace him and call it justice. Power has meaning only when a person knows where to stop using it. With the company stabilized, I turned back to the trust. Andrew and I began creating a plan Grandpa would have understood. One part would fund scholarships for children from military families. Another would provide short-term housing for veterans between jobs. We set aside money for emergency help when a parent was deployed and a family faced a crisis at home. We also funded mental health counseling. That choice mattered to me. My family had tried to use emotional strain as proof that I could not be trusted. I refused to answer that cruelty by pretending strong people never need support. Real strength is knowing what help you need and refusing to let anyone turn that need into shame. Compassion without limits is not always kindness. Sometimes it only teaches people that someone else will keep cleaning up after them. I helped protect the workers. I did not erase the consequences for my father or my brother. The trust was no longer only the thing they had tried to take. It was becoming a way to help people who had no power in the rooms where decisions were made. For the first time since Grandpa died, I felt that I was protecting more than a legal document. I was protecting the reason he had trusted me. A week after the restructuring agreement was signed, my mother sent a message asking if we could meet alone. Saving the jobs was easier than deciding whether there was anything left to save between my mother and me. Saving the jobs was easier than deciding whether there was anything left to save between my mother and me. For several weeks, she sent messages that sounded gentle. She hated how divided the family had become. My father was having a difficult time. She hoped we could move forward. Life was too short to hold on to anger. None of those messages said she had been wrong. None said she had known about the plan. None said she had helped turn my grief and military service into an argument against my judgment. None said she was sorry. Some invitations to reconcile are really requests for the injured person to stop naming what caused the break. When I finally agreed to meet, I chose a small restaurant on the edge of Richmond. It was not connected to the company or our family routines. There was no room where my father might appear and take over the conversation. My mother arrived early. She looked smaller than I remembered, not weaker, just less protected by the life she had arranged around herself. We ordered coffee. After a few minutes, she said she had been afraid. She feared losing the business, the house, and the life she understood. My father had convinced her the agreement was temporary. He said no one would really lose anything. Then I asked the question I had carried since the night outside the study. When you heard him talk about using my deployment against me, what did you think? She looked down at her cup. After a long pause, she said she thought I would sign. If I agreed, there would be no evaluation, no court, and no public fight. You believed it wasn't harm if I surrendered before I understood what was happening. She closed her eyes. Silverware touched plates around us. No one else knew that my mother and I were deciding whether trust could survive the truth. She said she had wanted to keep the family together. I told her that keeping people in the same room was not the same as keeping a family whole. Sometimes silence only keeps the person with the most power comfortable. Finally, she said, I should have stopped him. It was not a complete apology, but it was the first time she described her silence as a choice. I did not reach across the table. I did not tell her everything was forgiven. One honest sentence could not rebuild what months of deception had broken. I told her trust would not return because we had one calm conversation. If she wanted a relationship with me, she could not speak for my father. She could not carry his messages. She could not ask me to hide what happened to protect the family name. She had to respect the distance I needed. She nodded. For once, I did not soften the boundary to make it easier for her. My father sent a formal letter a few days later. He expressed regret over how events had unfolded. I did not answer. He regretted the result. He did not name what he had done. Jason never contacted me directly. He followed the restructuring plan, but still spoke as if consequences had been imposed on him rather than created by him. I began to accept that some relationships do not end with an apology or reunion. Sometimes they end with enough distance to make honesty possible. Around that time, I started seeing a counselor. I talked about Grandpa, the deployment, the guilt of being away, the betrayal waiting for me when I came home. I did not avoid therapy just to prove my family had lied about me. Getting help did not make their accusation true. It meant I refused to let untreated pain keep making decisions for me. Strength was not pretending I had not been hurt. Strength was deciding the hurt would not become my identity. Over the next few months, my world began to change. Andrew remained steady without controlling my choices. Helen shared quiet stories about Grandpa and never asked for anything. Veterans and military families entered my life through the programs we funded. Employees thanked me for protecting their jobs without protecting the people who had endangered them. None of them replaced Grandpa. They showed me something else. Trust is built through repeated actions, not a shared last name. That understanding gave me an idea for his house. I did not want it preserved like a museum or left empty behind locked doors. I wanted it to become a place for people who had returned from difficult places and were trying to build a life again. The first time I opened Grandpa's house to a group of veterans, a cardinal landed on the porch rail before anyone arrived. The first time I opened Grandpa's house to a group of veterans, a cardinal landed on the porch rail before anyone arrived. It stayed there while I carried folding chairs into the yard. Its red feathers looked almost too bright against the weathered wood. I did not take it as a sign. I had learned to be careful about turning every coincidence into a message, but I smiled anyway. I never sold the house. Once a year, we opened it for a weekend gathering for veterans and military families. Folding tables filled the backyard. Coffee stayed warm in the kitchen. Someone usually brought a guitar. Children ran along the porch while their parents talked in small groups beneath the trees. No one was required to explain what they had lived through. No one had to prove they belonged. Some people talked for hours. Others sat quietly with a cup in their hands and listened. Both were welcome. The study door remained open. That was important to me. The room where my family once discussed taking control of Grandpa's property became a place where families received help with scholarship applications and basic legal questions. Volunteers sat behind the same desk where Grandpa had recorded his final message. I could not change what had once been said behind that door, but I could decide what the door would open to now. The trust began producing results that felt more real than any number on a financial statement. One scholarship went to a college student whose father was serving overseas. She had planned to leave school for a year because her mother could not manage the tuition alone. The grant allowed her to stay enrolled. Another part of the fund helped a Gold Star family remain in their home after a death left them struggling with bills they had never expected to face alone. Those were the stories I remembered, not the account balances, not the property values, people. Early that summer, I drove to the cemetery by myself. The morning was quiet. The grass around Grandpa's headstone was still damp. I sat beside him and told him what had happened since my last visit. The company had survived. It was smaller and no longer controlled the way my father once demanded. Most of the employees had kept their jobs. The 2 trust properties had never been mortgaged. The first scholarships had been awarded. Veterans were receiving temporary housing. Families were finding counseling before their pain became a crisis. I told him my relationship with my parents was still limited. My mother and I spoke sometimes. Carefully, my father and I did not. I had finally stopped waiting for him to say he was proud of me. That had taken longer than winning the trust. For most of my life, I believed his approval would confirm that I had chosen well. I thought one honest sentence from him could repair years of being treated like the child who had walked away from the family. But my value had never depended on whether he understood it. I used to think Grandpa chose me because he believed I could manage money. Now I understood something deeper. He believed I could keep money from managing me. The trust had given me choices. It had also given me temptations. I could have used it to control the company. I could have humiliated my family. I could have made every decision based on proving that they had underestimated me. Instead, I tried to protect what mattered without becoming the kind of person who believed power made every choice acceptable. I placed my hand against the cool stone. I don't know whether I did everything perfectly, I said. But I didn't let them erase your choice. A cardinal called from a nearby tree. I remembered his letters. Did I sleep enough? Were the people under my command doing all right? Did I still listen for the birds near his porch? I sat there for another minute before standing. On the drive back, I thought about something my father had said outside that closed study door. She still thinks silence makes her strong. He had been wrong about my silence. But not because silence itself was power. Silence gave me time. Time to listen. Time to remember exactly what had been said. Time to ask for help before emotion decided my next move. Time to see who was telling the truth and who was only protecting their place in the family. Silence did not make me weak. It gave me time to hear the truth, protect the evidence, and act when they could no longer rewrite what they had done. When I returned to Grandpa's house, the gathering had already begun. Voices drifted through the open windows. Someone was tuning a guitar in the backyard. Coffee cups touched the kitchen counter. A child laughed somewhere near the stairs. One of the veterans stood at the front door and held it open for me. "We saved you a seat," he said. I stepped inside. I left the door open behind me. The sound of conversation moved out across the porch. A cardinal called from the yard, then disappeared into the trees. For years, I had felt like the person standing outside my own family, waiting to be invited in. I no longer needed that invitation. Family was not the people who shared my name while asking me to surrender myself. Family was the people who made room, the people who told the truth, the people who stayed when honesty became uncomfortable. I had not won because I was louder, richer, or more ruthless. I had won because I listened, kept the evidence, accepted the right help, and acted when the moment came. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer standing outside the door. Were you satisfied with how I handled my family, or do you think I should have walked away and let them face every consequence on their own? What do you think about her decision? Would you have done anything differently if you were in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this story gave you something to think about, please leave a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe so you never miss the stories still to come. Until we meet again in the next story. We are Honor Family Radio, using stories to walk beside you through the years and help you rediscover peace, courage, and strength within your heart.